Right, so today's video I'm going to discuss the Ottoman feudal cavalry, the Timariot Spahi. I've talked a lot about this in my other videos, or I've mentioned them, but I feel like it's probably time I do something a little more detailed, and I had to do some reading about this for my graduate coursework, so I thought I'd share what I was reading. I'm going to be focusing in on the earlier period of the Ottoman feudal cavalry, so up to like the late 15th century. Once you get into the 16th century, the situation changes a little bit. So I think a lot of people are familiar with the way feudal knights worked in Europe, especially if you're a wargamer. The idea being you have title to a land, and then that title passes from like father to son, typically, whether you're a knight or what have you, broadly speaking, right? The Ottomans adopt a system that's somewhat different, although fairly common in the Islamic world, the medieval to early modern Islamic world of the Iqta. And the idea is similar, where you're a soldier and you have rights to land in exchange for military service. However, in the Ottoman case, it was never like a fixed title, and your land was not permanent, so it was typically not transferred father to son, although what would happen sometimes was, if you were a Timariot holder and your son also served in battle, your son would be granted a Timar, but it would not be in the same geographic area. Why did they do this? The idea is just to make sure that people are loyal to the political center. So, again, comparison with medieval Europe, nobility is often at odds with royal power. Not to say that didn't happen in the Ottoman Empire, but it's a way to mitigate that, where someone who's the baron of whatever is going to be able to resist the central power. So that's kind of the setting the stage. And here in this picture, we have, this is from the Suleiman Name of Arif Chalabi, and we have probably a feudal cavalryman, a Timariot here. As you can see, he's more heavily armored, and he's fighting a Hungarian knight. This is the Battle of Mohacs. But we also have some of the lighter cavalry, probably the Akinji raiders. As you can see, they're more lightly armored, if completely unarmored. I believe this is a famous Ottoman. This is Deli Hassan, whom I don't know that much about, but I think that's him in combat with a European knight. So what was how did the Timariot units, for lack of a better word, function? It's a good question. So kind of like with again, to compare with the Europeans, it's a little similar. The idea is your Timar is evaluated by the government every so often, and you're granted a certain amount of privileges. So if the value of your Timar, of your feudal holding, is worth 1,000 akçe, so that's the silver coin, that's the unit of basic unit of currency in the empire. You want to think of it as like a dollar, let's say. But anyway, so if your Timar is worth 1,000 coins, it's just you have to go to war on your own. You don't have to bring anybody. But as your Timar increases in value, you have to bring more men and, in some cases, supplies. So if we go down here, So if you're a fairly wealthy Timar holder, so you have to go to war yourself, of course, and then you have to bring 4 Jebelu. So these are your armed retainers, uh, probably kind of like a European man-at-arms, but and then a gulam, so a servant. Now it's not totally clear sometimes, at least as I was reading to prepare this, what the gulam function. Gulam literally means slave or servant, but probably some kind of like steward or aide, something like that. And one chadir, or a tent. So you had to bring, this is what you had to bring. And this serves a few functions. So obviously it's manpower. You have trained Timarite soldiers, cavalrymen. And also, it relieves the state from having to pay for the cavalry. So they don't have to pay, the central government does not have to pay these men, because they're paid, the retainers are paid by the Timarite holder, and the Timarite holder equips himself. But like a lot of things, the Ottoman military, we're making these generalizations, and it's a lot of stuff is not totally clear. We have to make a lot of inferences, especially when you go to the earlier period. So starting, the earlier 14th century, when you have like Orhan and his immediate successors. But this is broadly, how it worked in the mid 15th century, when we do have a clearer picture of how the institutions functioned. Now, what was some of the equipment that they had? So early on, in the Gharib Name, so this is from 1330s. This is an early source. This is a poem written by a figure named Ashik Pasha, and whose descendant Ashik Pasha Zadeh would become a historian of the Ottoman Empire, an important source for early Ottoman history. But so his earlier ancestor Ashik Pasha wrote in his Gharib Name that these early soldiers in the kind of early Ottoman feudal kind of retinue, they carried a sword, a bow with arrows, of course, a lance, and wore a mail coat. So not too much difference in terms of what they would have used later on. What did change somewhat later, as the Ottoman Sultanate grew, was some of the men were supposed to have more heavy armor, and that's what this burume is. So this is a heavier kind of mail and plate coat that was provided more protection, a little more, a little heavier, and possibly the horse was also armored in some way. And then Jebe is the mail coat, so Jebelu is, with mail, basically, if you want to put it quite literally. And then once we get to the 15th century, the system is a lot better organized, and this is where we have more clear sources. But the weaponry had not changed all that much for the cavalry, so you're still they're still wearing mail, and they're still mostly carrying lances, bows, swords. Also, they used javelins and carried a shield. There was also another type of armor that they wore called a jevshen, which is mail with like lamellar plates. So we do have some variety in the equipment, but it's not completely uniform, it seems. Who were the retainers among that were called up? So the retainers were usually sons of the Timar holder, which is why, like earlier, I said, the Timar holder status did tend to pass from father to son because of this, but like not for the same territory. And in the Balkans, in some cases, you have Christian subjects, although as kind of the empire develops, that those Christian Timurid troops tend to diminish as people either assimilate into the kind of Ottoman Islamic culture, or they're just sort of kind of disenfranchised, if you want to put it that way. And then sometimes there were freed slaves that were in Timurid service. So that's just an overview for the early period of the Timurids. And here we have another, just wanted to include another picture. This is a later illustration of Nicopolis. We don't have quite so many Timurids. These look like they could be Ganulu, but it's not totally clear. But this is just kind of an overview of the Ottoman feudal cavalry system as it existed up to about the beginning of the 16th century. Obviously, when firearms come in, that changes things somewhat, although the Timurids are still in significant use into the 17th century, so they don't completely go away. Although, in siege warfare, they're not as important. But they did perform a role of protecting, trenches and things like that, but not, necessarily the main offensive unit in a siege, as far as we can tell. So this is an overview, like I said. I hope you found it interesting. In terms of applying this to war games, it doesn't have a complete use. I mean, other than providing you a overview of the system. What I would say, though, I think you could, if you wanted to build your Ottoman army, you could reflect the different types of Timars. So maybe have some of your Spahi being more heavily armored and others more lightly armored. You could reflect that in rules, perhaps, given that some of them have this Burame type armor. But it's you could use this in your wargaming to mix, kind of mix up how your Spahi look. So, but I hope you found this interesting. Like I said, thanks for watching, and I may do a follow-up on this in the about the Ganulu and the Akinji and these other cavalry formations. But what I would recommend you do is actually just read the source chapter that I based this on, which is by a good scholar named Paul Fodor, and it's in the Cambridge History of Turkey, Volume 1, which I highly recommend. It's an expensive book, but it's found online quite easily from various archive sites, or you can probably get it interlibrary loan if you'd like to do that. So read that. I recommend just read that to learn more, and he gets into a little more detail. But all right, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video.